So my name is Jay, and I am the founder of Joya Travel and Lifestyle.
What inspired you to create Joya Lifestyle?
So I actually went on a volunteer trip to a rural community in the Dominican Republic when I was about your age in high school. And I had a really amazing time, and I saw that the work that I was doing in the community really made a difference. And I saw that the people who joined me on the trip, their lives were impacted by the experience as well. And I just saw everybody else I know going to resorts and doing that sort of travel. And I just thought that the more people that do the type of travel and the type of trip that I did, the better off the world is going to be. So I kind of decided at that time that I wanted to do something like that. And as I got older, I just kept doing it.
That's really amazing. I watched your pitch video and you talked about Joya being the answer to travel in COVID-19. Could you expand more on that?
So community-based travel is primarily to rural regions, right? And rural regions are inherently or coincidentally set up for a COVID-19 world. There's lots of room to social distance. Most of the businesses who operate in rural regions are smaller businesses. So you don't get big hotels with thousands of people. They're little small businesses with a few cabins and a few experiences. And so they're perfectly designed for the COVID world. And so while we were doing this before COVID, it turns out that there's even more of an opportunity during COVID, particularly because travel and tourism can be such a great economic development tool for rural communities and businesses. And as well, it's really good for mental health for people to kind of get out of the cities and into nature and into rural regions. So it just happened to work out where it's a really, really good solution during COVID as well.
So have you seen a huge increase in your profits during COVID for this business?
Yeah, so I'll put kind of my business. I'll talk about kind of the market in general, like here in Ontario, for example, right? So I'll talk specific to the region that I'm in. So I'm in Southern Ontario, which is close to Toronto. So it's the most populated region in Canada. And then outside of Southern Ontario, as you go north, it's a very, very, very open nature kind of area with thousands and thousands of square kilometers. It turned out that in those regions, this past year, 2020, was the best year on record for tourism in those areas. So they actually did better than they ever have before, even businesses that have existed in those regions for 20 and 30 years.
So do you see this kind of trajectory continuing into the future as well, even without COVID?
100%. And the reason is because I think what's happened is that people, because of COVID, people have the opportunity to look a little bit deeper and determine what's important to them. And what you're seeing is that people are really falling in love with these small towns and rural communities. And they're seeing that there's tremendous benefits to being out in nature, experiencing something different, traveling a little bit. In the industry, we call it slower travel or smaller travel. So slower travel meaning not, going to Spain and trying to see as many different places as you can in a short period of time, but actually slowing down and staying in a particular region, getting to know the people, getting to know the culture, and just relaxing a little bit more. And smaller travel in that it's not necessarily about, more people, big resorts, big cafes, but small local rural places that are very kind of intimate, where you get to know the locals and don't have as many tourists around you, because when you don't have as many tourists around you, you're more likely to fall in love with the actual place that you are and the culture and the people that live there. And so these are trends that are happening all over the world. So I talked about, people in Southern Ontario traveling up to Northern Ontario, but people in, New York City are traveling to places upstate New York and rural regions. And I talked to somebody yesterday who lives in Dublin, Ireland. And when they weren't in lockdown, they're in lockdown right now. But people were traveling out to the rural communities. And so it's happening all over the world. And even interestingly enough, we have a couple partners out in Kenya, and because there's not as many North American and European tourists in Kenya, a lot of the locals who live in Kenya are experiencing travel where they may have not otherwise experienced travel during the high seasons, right? So they're experiencing some things in their regions as well. So these trends are happening everywhere in the world, and people are starting to build behaviors and really value this type of travel. And so the belief is that absolutely this will continue. And when people now do in the future, when COVID is behind us, start traveling to other regions of the world, they're going to want to do some of the same stuff that they've really fallen in love with at home and closer to home, because it's very, very different. So it's not like going somewhere in Ireland or Kenya. If you live in Ontario, it's not the same trip, right? It's something very, very different. It's a very different region. Sometimes they speak a different language. And so you really get the real rural culture and the local culture of the place that you're going. So we absolutely believe that these trends will continue.
So you mentioned that you do almost everything right now, and your business is, of course, much bigger than it used to be when you started. So when you started, did you face any struggles with having to do everything because you are the founder?
One of the challenges that startup founders face is trying to what's called operationalize your business or make your business more efficient. And so that's one of the goals for some founders like myself, is making the business bigger, but not duplicating all of the work that needs to get done. And that's where the technology comes in. So that's where we've been very much focusing on the technology that allows the business to grow bigger, but actually do less physical hands-on work. That's where, at the beginning, 5 or 6 years ago, absolutely, I was doing literally hands-on everything. Whereas as you get more experience and as you start to understand what the business needs, what it doesn't need, what's important, what are the things that you can solve and make more efficient with technology. Now, what I will say though is that you have to go through that first stage, right? Because if we had just gone out and said, okay, well, we're going to build technology to make it easier for small businesses to reach travelers and to run their business, well, we wouldn't have known everything that they need because we wouldn't have done it manually. So going through that process and doing it manually for a number of years, you learn all of the ins and outs, you learn what are the problems, you learn what works well and what doesn't, and then you can fix those. And that's when you can start to use technology to start to make it more efficient.
Can you give any tips to people who are considering to make their own startups, and what could help their process be easier?
Sell something. So the best way to grow a business is find somebody who's willing to give you money for the thing that you're selling. So where a lot of people go wrong is they stay in this idea or concept phase, and they tell people about their idea, and people say, yeah, that's a really good idea. That's a really great concept. Concepts don't make money, and a business ultimately has to make money, right? So it's interesting what happens when somebody says, hey, yeah, that's a really great idea. And then you say, hey, great, will you pay $30 for that idea? And then they say, oh, well, no, I don't know that I pay. Well, how good is the idea? So what's worked for us every step of the way is everything that we've decided to do, we think about it, we plan it out, but then we immediately go and do it. So, and by doing it, you quickly find out, do people care? Is it a right solution? Is there actually a problem that needs to be solved here? And the other thing that happens when you go and you try to sell it is people give you their feedback. The theory that if you can sell one of them, well, you can sell 2. And if you can sell 2, then you can probably sell 10. And if you can sell 10, well, then you can probably make a business out of it, right?
On that note, I actually wanted to ask if you had any experience with investors and venture capital and that kind of stuff, and if you have any tips for trying to pitch your business in a way that people will invest in your company.
Part of starting a business and part of being an entrepreneur is deciding what type of business you like to run. There are some people who run a part-time cupcake making business out of their parents' basement. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. That's a good business. You can make lots of money doing that. You can grow that slowly, or you can decide, hey, this business, brings me 20 to 30 or $40,000 a year, and I'm happy with that, and that gives me the life that I want to live, or whatever it is, right? So that type of business, you don't need venture capitalists, right? And so another example would be, let's say, for example, you want to start a cafe. That's a perfectly good business, but you don't need venture capitalists to start a cafe. You might need a loan from the bank. You might need a loan from family. You might need to save up your money over time from the cupcake bake business that you're doing on the side to then pay your first 6 to 12 months of rent so that you can get your cafe going, that sort of thing. But you don't need a venture capitalist for that type of a business, right? So a lot of people think, and I think there's like a Shark Tank kind of era out there where people see people coming in and pitching to Shark Tank. Venture capital comes in when you need money to grow your business and to grow it big, because a venture capitalist needs a return on their investment, right? So if a venture capitalist is going to say, hey, that's a really big business idea, I'm going to give you $1 million, they're not expecting $1 million in return. They're expecting 50 or $100 million in return, right? So if you don't have a business that can turn $1 million into $100 million, then you're not a venture capital business anyway. So that's the first step before I recommend that people think about venture capitalists, is decide what type of business is right for you. And you should only be thinking about venture capitalists or VC money when you're at the point where you're trying to continue to grow your business, but you look at the dollars and cents and go, hey, if I had $500,000, I would be able to make my product for half the price, and I would be able to distribute it at 10 times as many places. There's an example of a time where a venture capitalist goes, hey, I can see that you've sold 10,000 of these products. This is how much you pay for it. If I give you $500,000 or $100,000, you'll be able to get your costs down to half, and based on distribution, you'll be able to quadruple or 10 times your sales. There's something the venture capitalist might be interested in, right? So getting venture capitalist assistance or getting VCs to invest in your business, technically speaking, shouldn't really be that hard if you're ready for venture capitalists, because you should only be going to venture capitalists when you need their money to grow their business. Now, there are exceptions where, certain types of business, whether it's deep tech or science or biotech businesses or that sort of thing, sometimes there's like a really, really good idea that has a lot of research components and science components, and there's a lot of money required and able to do that research and develop the product. There's another example of where venture capitalists might give their money, but that's a high risk for venture capitalists because it's a longer play and it may or may not actually turn out the way you want. But there's an example of where some venture capitalists do choose specifically to focus on those types of businesses, but most of the time what they're looking for in those businesses are people who are experts. So somebody that they look at and go, yeah, I believe that you can create what it is that you say you're going to create. You just need this amount of money to do it. And if I give you this amount of money, well, then you're going to do it. And then I'll make back my investment that way.
So you talked a lot about customer research and market research. How did you kind of what was the progression of that from the start of your business to right now?
So one way of doing things is to decide, hey, here's a problem that I want to solve. Here's something I'm passionate about. And now you start doing your customer research, right? You start talking to people. You start finding out what's important to them, what's broken about what they're currently using, where the opportunity is to fix it, all that sort of thing. That's one way to do it. The other way to do it, which is kind of what we did, is we just started doing what we loved, right? And as you do it, this goes back to my earlier comments, which is just sell. We were doing what we love, but we had to convince or inspire other people, both communities who wanted to host travelers and travelers who wanted to go to communities. You've got to convince them to go. And so through that process, you find out, well, what do they want? What do they not want? What do communities want? What do communities not want? And so by just doing it, you learn a lot. You learn a lot more by doing, right? So for example, if I were to ask either of you, would you list one of your top 5 skills as sales?
Probably
yes or
not.
no? Probably not. Right. So guess what? If you have a business idea and you got to go out and try to get people to buy it, what are you doing? You're selling.
Yeah.
So if you do that 10 times a day, well, suddenly it becomes a skill. If I were to ask you right now, is building a website one of your top 5 skills? Probably not. Well, what happens when you're forced to have to go and figure out how to build a website? Now it becomes one of your skills. So you just learn by doing.
This is the last question from my behalf. What was your college experience like, and did it affect where you are today?
I can't lie to you. I dropped out. I would never recommend you do that. Don't do it. I'm not saying this is don't do it. Finish school. When I left school, I wasn't the type of person to kind of, leave school. And this was second year. So after my second year of university, I wasn't the type of person to leave and then just kind of get lazy. So I went out and I got a job right away. And I landed a job in marketing. And then from there, I landed a job in sales. And so I was like, oh, I kind of like this marketing thing. I kind of like this sales thing. And on the side, I started doing these volunteer trips. And so you can kind of see how things just kind of started kind of coming along.
Were there any people that helped you along the way in terms of maybe like guiding you after going out of school, or maybe even starting your business?
Tons. You can't do anything yourself. It's impossible. And so I don't want to get philosophical here, but I hate the expression that one person can change the world, because it's just not true. One person can, inspire a small group of people, and collectively that group of people can inspire a bigger group of people, and that group of people can inspire a bigger group of people, and evidently you can get a whole bunch of people that can change the world. Yes, there are people out there like, scientists who invent something that absolutely changes the world. But does that person do it on their own? Absolutely not. They have assistants, they have people helping them, so no matter where you look, there's no one person who alone did anything, really, really big. And when I say big, this is where I'm talking about big things that change the world, but even if somebody wants to start a cupcake factory or a cupcake, business, like use that example out of your parents' basement, well, your parents have to let you, right? And so that's an example of kind of a more intimate or small family thing of people that are helping you and guiding you along the way. And so for me, I kind of tell people this all the time, I'm actually not that smart. I just look to other people for insights and try to treat other people well and treat other people with dignity and respect and help other people wherever I can. And if you do that and you just kind of keep telling people what you're doing, eventually you find people who are interested and passionate about what you're doing. And so if you go and help other people are willing to help you. And so it's really just all about relationships. So absolutely.
I think that's all the questions that we have for you today. Do you have any closing remarks?
Yeah, so I'll say something that's probably different than what other people might say. And I a lot of people believe that an entrepreneur should follow your passion, right? Like find what your passion is, find what you love, and go and do that and make a business out of it. I don't necessarily believe that needs to be true. I always caution people to not necessarily just take things that you love and make that a business. Look a little bit more broadly. Here's a silly example off the top of my head that's not cupcakes. Maybe you really love sports and you really love going to baseball games. And one of the things that you hate about going to a baseball game is parking your car, right? And it's the one thing about going to sports games or going to baseball games you just despise. And everybody you talk to goes, I know, it sucks. I hate that. And I got to leave early because I got to get to my car and I got to beat traffic, or I parked on somebody's lawn and somebody parked behind me. And well, that to me sounds like an opportunity where there may be something that can be fixed around transportation to and from a sporting event or going to sports. And that's like, and now, well, is there an application for that outside of sports? Perhaps like outdoor festivals or concerts, or I don't know, I'm just making this up, but it's just an example of people tend to often block themselves in because they're focused so much on what they're passionate about and what they're interested in. And I challenge people to look a little bit more broadly in and around that passion. And that's when you really start digging in. You can find that there's something in there that you really, really care about that's not directly the thing.
Very nice remarks.